Today is August the 4th, 2017. My name is Richard McCubbins, and we are in the KGEM studios in Monrovia, California. This recording is part of the Library of Congress Veterans History Program, being conducted through the Monrovia Public Library. Today, we're interviewing Joseph Charles Callahan, a Vietnam veteran who will be asking a number of questions. Present in the interview room are Mabel Cross, Anthony Clay, Steve Whistler, and David Bauer. We'll start off by telling you something about Joseph. He was born in Santa Monica, California on December 1st, 1951, and is a resident of Monrovia, California. Joseph, would you tell us about your family and remembrances of growing up?
Absolutely. My family moved to Arkansas when I was 9 years old. And while I lived in Arkansas, I fell in love with swimming in the water. Spent all my summers in the lakes, rivers, and creeks there, swimming both on the surface and underwater. And spent the winters, because my father taught me how to shoot, I spent the winters hunting, and a lot of duck hunting, rabbit hunting, and so forth. So I got to be not only a very excellent swimmer, but a very excellent marksman as well. And my father, I got to learn a bit about him during that time, because he would take me hunting with him, and I found out that he was an Army veteran who was a prisoner of war under the Japanese. He was in the Bataan Death March. He spent virtually the entire Second World War in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. And he had friends in the prison camp that I got my names from. Joseph actually died. He was my father's best friend. He died in prison camp. Charles, like my father, survived prison camp, and Charles went on to retire from the Army after 20 years. He sent my father a postcard in Arkansas to tell him he was retiring. And my younger brother, Jimmy, was named yet for another one of my father's friends from prison camp, who died a couple of days afterwards through a tragic accident, which was kind of ironic to survive all of prison camp and die a couple of days later. But my father also spoke Japanese as a result of this, because the only language they were allowed to speak in prison camp was Japanese. So you learn it if you spend 3 years in prison camp with that language intense. Well, we moved back to California. When I went into high school, I started scuba diving, and I fell in love with scuba diving. I wanted to make it a career. So I became, after a certified scuba diver, I went on to advanced courses and had ambitions to become a scuba instructor with a national organization called NAUI, which stands for National Association of Underwater Instructors. And the same summer I graduated from high school, I took what they called NAUI Hell Week test to become a scuba instructor. I passed, which was rare because I was only 18 years old, and there was one other student in addition to myself who was 18, and we both became fully certified instructors at 18, which is very rare. Usually only half of the people who take the NAUI scuba instructors certification actually become fully certified, and about another quarter of them get provisionals. We both got full certification. Well, I wanted to work as a scuba diver, and I would teach classes whenever I could. I got a job in a scuba shop, and the scuba shop ended up going out of business, and there wasn't enough full-time work, so I considered joining the military. I went to the Army recruiter because my father was in the Army and my older brother were in the Army. My older brother, Jerry, was he did 20 years in the Army, and he also motivated me as well as my father to try to get into the Army as well, except in hindsight, or after second thoughts about it, I went, there's no diving program. I went, it makes more sense to go in the Navy. So I did all the testing with the Army, but I went to the Navy recruiter, and said, you know, what can you do for diving? He told me about BUDS, which stands for Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training. And I said, that's your diving school? Yeah, that's the diving school. So I said, okay, sign me up. You can get my files from the Army recruiter next door, and I'll go in. Well, I reported June 28th, 1971. That was my original enlistment. And I did have guaranteed BUDS, and I went to boot camp. And by the way, I love boot camp. I mean, boot camp, I had 3 square meals a day. I had brand new clothes. These are things that I didn't have growing up. So I was in heaven. I enjoyed it. And it was a lot of physical demands, calisthenics and so forth, running, marching, and all. I had a great time. And I went into a special boot camp company after 5 weeks, which was BUDS company. And you still had to meet the requirements for graduation from boot camp. So you had to make sure that if your company was going to, like, firefighting school, that you tagged along that day and you got qualified to graduate. But aside from that, you know, you were just having fun every day. We played a lot of volleyball. We paddled around in rubber boats, which are called IBSs, stands for Inflatable Boat Small. And we swam a lot, exercised all the time. And eventually I graduated from boot camp, and I got to sit with my family because having not marched with my boot camp company for 4 weeks, I was not allowed to march with them on graduation day. But the positive side of that was I got to sit with my family and watch the graduation. Then I reported to Coronado for BUDS.
Okay, so you're in BUDS training. How did that work out?
Well, I got there early, and some of the people, because most of the people who go to BUDS, they come from the fleet, so they've already been on ships or other duties somewhere in the Navy. They put in for BUDS, they qualify. Education requirements, physical requirements. You have to be able to run and a certain distance in an amount of time and swim a certain distance in an amount of time and so forth. So they meet all the requirements. They get sent to BUDS. And then at BUDS, they start showing up. Well, I needed people to work out with. So some of the new guys and I struck up a friendship. And I took them on what you would call a SEAL workout, you know, which typical workout was 2 hours long. And I ran them and had them do push-ups and exercise like crazy. And when we actually started the class, the BUDS class started, they were very happy to have come early and been able to work out with me because they weren't hurting as badly as some of the other people who were there.
Okay, so BUDS training completed?
Well, I didn't complete. I dropped out. And what happened was I weighed about 140 pounds. And it was November, and it was cold. I know San Diego, people don't think it's cold, but if you go in the ocean without a wetsuit, it's cold. And we were doing long distance swims in the ocean, and without a wetsuit, my muscles were cramping up. I couldn't swim any longer. I had to signal that I was in distress. And as the instructor pulled me out of the water, he said, "You just quit." Now, he probably just meant that I quit the swim. He probably didn't mean that I quit the program. But in my mind, I went, this is not for me. So I did ring the bell. And by the way, that bell was what I shined every day. It was one of my duties, was to shine the bell that people had to ring in order to quit. And I also had to make the coffee for the instructors in the lounge every day. And so I rang the nefarious bell. And they have an exit interview. The instructors had me come in, and they said, well, why did you quit? I said, because I don't want to be a killer. I joined the Navy to be a diver. They went, well, you can put in for a diving school after you spend some time in the fleet and you've got a rating. At this point, I didn't have a rating. I was a non-rated seaman apprentice, and a rating means I had no service code, no designation code. So that made me an automatic bosun's mate, by the way. So I had to wait for orders. I went to the transit barracks where I polished and cleaned floors every day until I had orders come in, and then they were to the USS Mispillion, AO 105. Now, the USS Mispillion is an oiler. It's a fleet oiler, refuels ships underway. And oilers in the Navy are named after rivers. The Mespilian River is in upstate New York. And I had not seen a ship like that. It was an amazing thing. And, king posts, which are long or high-standing steel structures with fuel hoses hanging off of them. And the idea is you cruise alongside other ships and through a lot of extensive rigging, starting with a shot line and the messenger lines and so forth. Eventually, you get all your rigging between the two ships, and you pump fuel over to the other ships that are next to you and refuel the fuel tanks. So we had to go through a couple of months of training prior to deployment to Western Pacific called Westpac. And this was during Vietnam, so I knew we were going over there. We were going to be in combat area. And so we went through the extensive training, and I learned my way around ship. I learned about what my duties would be. I was assigned to the side cleaning aboard the ship, which means all around the outside I had to chip paint and clean off oil spills and repaint the ship and keep it looking good. And it's one of those jobs that never has an end. You know, you go around on scaffolding the ship over and over again doing the same thing. Except at sea, I was assigned to take care of the work boats and the captain's gig aboard the vessel. So there, the only difference in the duties was I'd put tennis shoes on and go work in the boats. And my petty officer that I reported to is named Bosun's Mate 3rd Class Earlywine. He made several impressions on me about work ethic, being responsible, that benefited me my entire life. And to this day, I still look back at that as, it doesn't matter, how hard you work. Are you supportive to the other people that work with you? Do you take responsibility not only for yourself but for them? And I learned this firsthand with Bosun's Mate Earlywine, because when some of the people who would disappear, who were supposed to be working with me, they got punished and I got punished. And so I went, I have to make them accountable as well. So we did a deployment to Vietnam, and it was supposed to be a 6-month deployment. It turned into a 9-month deployment because the ship that was to relieve us had a collision, and we had to take up their duties for an extra few months. I was looking for someplace, one of the jobs aboard ship that I'd like to do one day. And I looked and saw some people sitting in an air-conditioned office. And as you know, in the South China Sea, it's hot, it's humid. And it doesn't matter what time of the year it is, it's usually hot and humid. And I saw some people in an office with air conditioning. I went, that's the job I'd like to get. And they were disbursement clerks, which is payroll masters in the Navy. So I put in the paperwork for DKA school, and this was during our deployment. And our last trip into port, into Subic Bay in the Philippines, my orders were there, and I had orders to go to DKA school in San Diego. And so my friends threw a little going away party for me, and the going away party, you might say, was, go out and just really get intoxicated. So they bought all the rounds, and I did all the drinking, and I remember very little about that night, but I remember a couple of times on the way back to the ship, I had to have them stop so I could get sick, the taxi cab. And we got back to the ship, and I was not in a condition to pack my own sea bag. And my friends, who are still my dear friends today, and we stay in touch, we see each other now and then, they packed my sea bag for me. And so they put everything I had in the bag, but I didn't really see everything that they did. And one of the things they put in there was a steel shackle. This is a small version of what they put in the bag. This is a screw pin shackle made out of steel. The pin screws in and out, except the one they put in my bag weighed about 30 pounds. And they packed it down underneath my clothes. And in the Philippines, of course, that's where I left the ship. It's hot, it's humid, and I also, when I got to Clark Air Force Base, I had to be on standby for a flight back to California. And that meant being in the uniform of the day in California, which was dress blues. So I had to be in a wool suit every day in the heat and humidity of the Philippines, and I had to drag this heavy sea bag around. After a couple of days of me thinking it was just a hangover, I realized there's something in this bag, and that was when I found a 30-pound shackle that they put in there. And I got a good laugh at that. So when we meet, we tell these kind of stories, and we discuss these things. So I reported to San Diego Disbursement Clerk A School. There were 33 students in the class. I finished 7th. While I was there, I got a letter of commendation from the Mispillion because of the appearance of the ship for the work and efforts. I was in very good physical condition when I went to the Mispillion, as you can imagine, from SEAL training. So there was nothing I couldn't do. I swung over the sides. I could climb up and down the lines all day long. Even while underway, if the captain wanted the anchor painted, I could swing down and paint it without the ship stopping and get back up again. And so he was very impressed, and it came in handy. I also got the medals for Vietnam campaign and Vietnam Republic medals for my service there. And so at DKA school, I got all of those things given to me at DKA school because I left in a hurry when we got back into Subic Bay. And after finishing Disbursement Clerk A school, where I believe I was 7th out of a class of 33, I had orders to the U.S. Naval Academy, actually the Naval Station, which is affiliated with the Naval Academy, to work in payroll department. And one of my other classmates in the DKA school, he went there as well, Bill Kearns, and he's also I stay in touch with, a friend of mine that I stay in touch with today. And I was promoted to DK3, so I was now rated. And while I was at the U.S. Naval Academy, I reserved through special services the Naval Station pool, and I was a certified scuba instructor, so I taught scuba classes there. During the summers, I'd teach 2 or 3 scuba classes every year and certify the students. And one of my coworkers said, well, why haven't you put in for diving school? And I said, buds? He said, no, there's a diving school. So I looked into it, saw I was qualified. I put in for it. I had to agree to re-enlist. Before this all happened, I was promoted to DK2, so I got promoted again. And I put in for the school. And I had orders to Harbor Clearance Unit 2 in Little Creek, Virginia for second-class diver school.
And so you're in disbursement work, you're training and diving?
Yes.
And you're re-enlisted?
And I'm re-enlisted.
So you've got
another 4 years to go.
So what happened then?
Well, I re-enlisted on June 6, 1975, so that was my second enlistment. I reported to the school in Little Creek a little while after that, and the instructors, they were set back a bit. They go, what is this? You're a disbursement clerk. And they kind of had a chuckle about it. This is a payroll guy. Even if he can pass the classroom, he's going to have trouble with the swimming, the physical training and all that. But they didn't know my previous history. I was in top shape, and I still was an active scuba diver with my classes at the Naval Academy. So, and I had been through far worse than what they could do when I went through the Maui Hell Week, because the instructors in the Maui Hell Week were former SEALs. And so they put me through the ringer, as they did everyone, trying to get you to wash out, and I handled it. So the instructors at the diving school were into the scuba week, and our classes, the people are falling like flies. They're just dropping left and right. And we got down to the last 9 students, and I was the senior petty officer, so that made me class leader at the end of scuba week. So now, as I had learned from early wine, I'm not only responsible for myself, I'm responsible for everybody in the class as well as the class as a whole. And every time something's not right, whether it's my fault, one of the students' fault, or the class's fault, I get punished along with those responsible. So it was a good learning experience about the rewards and punishment of being in management. And I carried that also with me for the rest of my life. I had very high expectations of the people who reported to me because, we were all divers and we depended on each other to live. But remember, too, that this is the era that the Navy still used the Mark V hard hat gear. And the hard hat gear is gunmetal, helmet, breastplate, weight belt, shoes. Just one shoe on the Air model weighs 12.5 pounds. So it was 190 pounds of equipment. You get dressed on the surface. You have to go to the ladder, climb up and down the ladder into the water to dive. So you had to be in good shape. And so after scuba, week 3, it was all hard hat the rest of the time. Well, it was my privilege to meet Master Chief Master Diver Carl Brashear while I was in second class diving school. He's the man who you hear his story in the movie Men of Honor. He was the first African-American diver in the Navy, and he had one leg. He lost a leg in an accident in the Navy. So his whole story is in the movie. Well, I met him in diving school. He showed up at the second class diving school to make a qualification dive. You're required to make one dive a year to keep your diving quals. So he showed up, and I asked the instructors, what's the story with this African-American man who's a diver who has one leg? And they told me his story. So when the movie came out, I said to my wife, I know that guy. I met him in school, and it was really impressive. And he was very impressive. To this day, I don't know a person who is as good in a Mark V as Master Chief Brashear was, because he went to the bottom of the harbor in that equipment, and he could travel across the bottom like a streak of lightning and pull that hose right on out. And I was impressed. Well, we got to ask him questions about how he did that, and he gave us some pointers that helped us actually to finish our class project, which was a salvage project, because our divers then were able to get to the project and back without getting bogged down in 4 feet of soft mud, which was on the bottom of the harbor. So he did help us out, and that was great. And my hat's off to him. Great respect for the man. Well, we finished second class diving school, and I got my orders to my first diving vessel, which was the USS Matako, ATF 86. USS Matako is a fleet tug, and fleet tugs are named after Native American tribes. So there's a Cree, Apache, Cherokee. This tribe not as well known as the Matako. That was an Indian tribe as well, a Native American tribe. It was built and commissioned in 1943. It was built by women because women were making all the ships back then. But the realistic thing about ships that were made during World War II is they were not expected to last very long. They were expected to be sunk. So they got them out quickly, making, in essence, lots of targets to get out there. So here it is in 1970s, it's 1975, 76. And so I reported aboard in 1975, and we're going on a Westpac cruise on this ship. And one of my fellow classmates from diving school, Petty Officer Dan Broderick, he got orders to the same ship. And so, it's like, we're going to be together, and I'm still going to be your boss. So I was the senior diver and petty officer in the diving locker aboard the Matako, and I had Dan and one other individual diver and our diving officer. So there were only 4 divers on the ship. It was a very small ship. It had about 65 people on it, so not a very large crew. But also being a very small ship, going on a Westpac was going to be interesting because I'd crossed the Pacific on the Maspilian, and we crossed in heavy seas. It was a very rough transit. This ship, you have a few 3 or 4 foot swells, and it would bounce quite extensively. And a lot of the people on it got seasick. It was the only ship, and in fact the only vessel I'd ever been on in my life where I did get seasick one time. And that one time I got seasick, it was doing 45-degree rolls. It was pretty rough. There were footprints on the bulkheads because that would become the deck every so often. And we did a deployment to Westpac. We actually broke down on the way over there because the ship was showing its age, but we still made it. We got to Guam after 6 weeks, from Hawaii to Guam in 6 weeks. we were not able to escort a couple of minesweepers because of the breakdown, so they had to stay in Honolulu. But we got to Guam, and the first thing we did is go into the shipyard for the extensive repairs so we could finish our commitment. And then we went to the Philippines, Singapore, Hong Kong, number of different ports. Because this was during the bicentennial year now, we're going into 1976. And as we went into the bicentennial, it was kind of like carry the U.S. flag worldwide. So that was what the Navy was doing worldwide at that time, was show the U.S. flag. And we got to do a Marshall Islands survey on the way home. And that was 4 weeks of cruising through the Marshall Islands, stopping and talking to the natives and assessing how many births and deaths and determining whether or not the Japanese have been there, which they were not allowed to go into the Marshall Islands for any reason. And we finished that with some excellent diving. I got to do a lot of scuba and snorkel diving while I was in the Marshall Islands. It was a lot of fun. And we got back to San Diego, which was the home port of the ship, and I put in for first class diving school. And while we were in San Diego, we had some projects. You know, we went out for a test dive of the DSRV-1, that's Deep Submarine Rescue Vehicle. Deep Submarine Rescue Vehicle was showcased in a movie called Gray Lady Down, Charlton Heston movie. So you can look at that movie and see what the DSRV looked like. It capable of diving to 5,000 feet to rescue submariners in a downed submarine, and made test dives at night, you know, because they wanted the dives to be at night so that Soviets wouldn't be able to see it from space. And we did some test ASROC torpedo runs and had to recover those. But we did one salvage project. It was on a Friday night, and I got a call at home on a Friday night about 10:30 at night that I had to report to. It wasn't my ship, it was another ship, I don't recall which one, to go out for the weekend and salvage a helicopter. A helicopter had flown out of North Island Naval Air Station in San Diego, and a little while after takeoff from North Island Naval Air Station, it lost its power and it crashed into the harbor. And helicopters are very top heavy because the motor is at the top under the rotary blades. So as soon as it hits the water, it flips upside down, and it's not watertight, so it sinks very quickly. So the pilot and the crewman, they both got out, but neither of them knew the other survived. It was nighttime. They didn't see each other on the surface. The pilot got out on the surface before it rolled over and sank. Well, it might already have rolled over, but it hadn't sunk yet. But the crewman rode it all the way to the bottom. Fortunately for him, it was only 40 feet deep, because the water coming into the helicopter pushes everything to the very back of the craft, which they have cargo nets in front of the rear to keep people from getting pushed into so far they can't get out. And the helicopter went to the bottom, and then the guy swam to the surface, and they didn't know both had survived until they were both brought in and talked to about what had happened. We spent the weekend nonstop, working throughout the weekend, getting a helicopter out of the harbor so the harbor would be fully open by Monday. And late Sunday night, we dropped it off, and I finally got some sleep and had to be back at work on Monday morning.
Okay, so you're finishing your tour on the USS Matako, and where did you go from there?
I had orders to first class diving school. And that was at that time, it was at the Washington Navy Yard in Washington, D.C. And it's right on the Anacostia River. And so it's one of those tributary rivers that runs to the Potomac. So people kind of go, well, Washington, D.C. is kind of landlocked. Well, it is. You know, you got these rivers right there with zero visibility, which is ideal for training divers. And it was. It was used as a experimental diving unit during the 1930s, 1940s, and it was a historical site, still is today, of all the equipment that's there that was used in developing decompression and treatment tables for the U.S. Navy. So I reported it was a winter time, and it was a very cold winter, 1976, 1977. And we literally had to break ice some days before we could get divers in the water. But again, you go back and you're using surface applied equipment. You're using hot water suits to keep you warm under the ice. You're using dry suits, which of course the Mark V, the hard hat rig, is a dry suit as well. Except here you also get mixed gas training. So you take the 190-pound Mark V that's used for air diving, and now it's a 300-pound suit because it has heavier shoes to keep your feet underneath you, has recycling canister on the back for CO2 absorbent. And now the equipment goes from 190 pounds to 300 pounds. And in the movie, again, with Men of Honor, when Master Chief Bashir had to walk in that mixed gas suit, keep in mind he was walking with 300 pounds of equipment on him, and he had to walk 20 paces in it to keep his diving quals with one leg. And it was hard for all of us young, healthy, and physically fit guys to stand and walk in 300 pounds of equipment. We did it, but it was hard. A very, very heavy piece of equipment. Now, the Mark V was still used, obviously, until throughout the late 70s, and it wasn't finally retired until early 1980s when they went to a lighter equipment. We got mixed gas training all the way to 300 feet, and then we got submarine salvage experience, demolition training, and after we graduated, April 1st, 1977, I had orders to the USS Edenton in Little Creek, Virginia, once again. So I was going back to Little Creek. And when I reported to the USS Edenton, ATS-1, this was a salvage vessel. It had nothing else comparable to it except its sister ship. And these were ships, the Edenton and her sister ship, they were actually built in England to pay back the United States for the Lend-Lease Act. So these, like, here's one of your ships back, and we got this ship. And so when I reported, it was in the shipyards. It was undergoing a major overhaul in the shipyards. The day I reported aboard, it was Friday. The other divers said, "Oh, we're going back to first class diving school on Monday for qual dives," because the divers have been in the shipyards. They needed to make a dive to keep their diving quals. So on Monday, I'm right back at the diving school in Washington, D.C. again. And the instructors go, "What are you doing back?" I was like, "Well, I'm here for qual dives." "You've only been gone a week." They're like, "Well, I know." Anyway, so I got to meet the divers and get acquainted with them while we were there from the Edenton. 17 divers on that ship, so it was a much larger ship, but it was still a bit over 100. There was about 110 people on it, but the ship was primarily about diving. That's why there were so many divers on it, 17. And after we came out of the shipyards, we went through training. We did some local coastal exercises, like salvaging a fishing boat that was in distress. And then we had orders to the Mediterranean. So I got to make a med cruise on this ship. We went to the Mediterranean, escorting a couple of minesweepers to Portsmouth, England. And so we refueled them every couple of days during the entire trip to Portsmouth. Got to see Portsmouth a little bit. Then we went into the Med. And we did some interesting projects while we were there. We laid an explosive mooring for the USS Little Rock in Gaeta, Italy. It was a brand new type of equipment that literally fired the flukes from an anchor into the bedrock. So it's a permanent anchorage, and uses like the projectile for a 5-inch shell to do that, the propellant for a 5-inch shell. But we did a salvage job off of the coast of Turkey, where NATO had dropped practice mines, and the idea was if hostilities broke out between the United States and the Soviet Union, the United States and NATO, their NATO allies, would blockade the Soviets from getting out of the Black Sea. And the plan was they would mine the Dardanelles, which is a very narrow passageway coming from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. And so NATO dropped 24 practice mines, and we had to recover them. So we showed up almost 2 weeks after they were dropped, because it was a long ways from Naples, where we were, to the Dardanelles. And then when we got there, the pingers on these were starting to fail. We probably only recovered about 5 or 6 of them before the pingers completely quit working. Now the pingers make noise, so you put acoustic hearing devices in the water and then you'd locate where it is. Well, once they stopped working, we had to come up with a way to get the rest of the 24 mines. And we came up with a plan to take our work boats, put 2 divers on lines coming off of the work boats with boards cut with handholds on the boards, and you're using mask, fins, snorkel, wetsuit. That's pretty much all the diving equipment you needed. It was a breath hold diving, and you take turns between the 2 divers pushing down on the board until you can see the bottom. And as the boat pulls you through the water, you're looking for a mine. If you find a mine, you let go of the board to surface. Then they know you have a mine there. So the ship comes over, recovers the mine, and you do that all day, 7 days a week. And at the end, the last mine we found was in 130 feet of water. And the 24th one we didn't find. So we found 23 of the 24. We assume that the last one was in even deeper water, which theoretically we wouldn't have been able to do this. It's been too deep to find it. Then after a tour in the Mediterranean, and also at that time, I was still taking the test to get promoted to first class petty officer. And I kept taking the DK test, DK1 exam, and I kept passing it but not getting promoted. And the reason is there were a limited number of first class positions. In fact, the Navy was automating their pay records, so they didn't need as many disbursement clerks. I happened to apply for the school when they needed to have more for a short period of time, disbursement clerks. And then once all the pay records were converted to computers, they would need far fewer disbursement clerks. And so I couldn't get a first class position. I passed the test, but I couldn't get promoted. So I got a call from the detailer, the diving detailer, and the diving detailer said, I can't have a diving disbursement clerk any longer. It turned out I wasn't the only one, by the way. I'd run into another diving disbursement clerk in the Philippines, but I was the first one to become a diver who was a disbursement clerk. And he said, I can't have a diving disbursement clerk any longer. You have to change your rating. He said, what are you going to be? Well, I knew being a bosun's mate because I had been on an oiler. I had worked always as a bosun's mate on all the ships I was on. So I went, I'm a bosun's mate. He went, so be it. So I was an instant second-class bosun's mate. And I took the very next exam for first-class bosun's mate and got promoted on the first try. So, and the interesting thing about it was that test had a lot of questions about underway replenishment. In other words, oiler duty. And so I was an expert at that. So I did very well on the test, got promoted in December of 1978 to first class bosun's mate, and had to make a decision what I was going to do. Was I going to stay in the Navy and then make it a third enlistment? But I had a wife and I had 2 small children. And one of the sad truths was that there were a limited number of divers in the Navy, and because of that limited number, if they needed divers somewhere other than on your ship, the Navy would just send you to another ship to go work. So I was at sea 5.5 years of my 8 years. And I went, oh, that's way too much. And my kids literally didn't know me. Because I came home one time and my 2-year-old daughter, my wife said, well, where's your daddy? Well, I'm sitting there. She goes and gets a picture because that was daddy. And I'm like, okay, this is it. I got to get out of the Navy. I did have orders come in, and it would have been shore duty. I know where I was going to go. I was going to get sent to the submarine training school in Honolulu, Hawaii. And they went, you're going to get these great orders, plus the reenlistment bonuses for first-class divers. A 6-year reenlistment would have paid me $17,000. But I went, no, I don't think so. It's not worth the money, and it's not worth 4 years of shore duty in Honolulu because then I'll still go back to sea afterwards. So I chose to get out, and I left the service on May 30th, 1979.
Okay, so you're leaving the service. Did you have some jobs lined up? Did you
I
have
was-
an opportunity to?
I did. Yes, I had the foresight to know I loved teaching, and now I was highly qualified diving wise. I was very qualified. In fact, the first class diving school, an interesting footnote about that is it's a 4.0 and go system. Now, 4.0 means you have to ace every test. You miss one question, you fail. So you have to ace all the tests. You have to complete all of the projects. Anything less than that, you're a failure and you get kicked out of school. You only get a second chance one time, so, and the second test is harder than the first one. And if you don't pass that one, then you're finished. You get sent back to the fleet. So everyone knows your reputation as a first-class diver. You're very knowledgeable and you're very experienced. So there were 3 diving schools I was interested in learning more about, possibly working for. There was one in Seattle, Washington, one in Oakland, California, and one in the LA Harbor, Wilmington, California. The one in Wilmington was closer to where I grew up and went to school and so forth, so I was most interested in that. Seattle, I kind of went, I'm not familiar with that area. It rains a lot is all I've heard, and I think I'll pass on that one. Well, all of the directors from those schools wanted to talk to me. I went up to Oakland. I spoke to the director there. I was not impressed. So I went and spoke to the director at the Commercial Diving Center. A Commercial Diving Center is the LA Harbor. And it's Wilmington, California. And nice guy. I think his name was Gene. And I went in and spoke to him. He was impressed. He wanted to hire me. And we did it on a handshake. He said, well, on June 1, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you, and, you'll be coming to work with us. So June 1 came around, and I showed up at the school, and Gene wasn't there. And I talked to the new director, and he said, oh, we don't need any instructors. I went, well, I've already been hired. I bought a house in the area. I've relocated to family here, and I've told everyone I work for you. And he goes, oh, well, let me get back to you. What he didn't know is the director, not the director, but the president of the school was an old-time friend of mine. But I didn't want to use him and our relationship to get the job. I wanted it totally on my merit, and I had gotten the job solely on my merit. Well, he went up and talked to the president of the school, whose name is Jim Joyner, and he said, Jim, got this guy downstairs who says that he was hired by Gene, and Gene, had a heart attack, and he's not here anymore, and now I'm the director. What do you want me to do? He said, well, what's his name? He told him my name. He said, hire him. Of course, he didn't know why he said that, because he's a friend of mine. But anyway, I had the job, and it was good, because a couple of months later, they had an accident out in the harbor. They brought up a student clinically dead, and I took him down in a recompression chamber, and he survived. Not solely due to my efforts, but that was the right thing to do to save his life. And aside from a little bit of lost memory from that morning, he was totally fine after that. I bought a home on a GI Bill. I went to college on the GI Bill. Today I have VA medical. I raised my 2 children. They're both adults and they have professional careers. The marriage didn't work out, unfortunately. I've remarried. I have the true love of my life now, and we've been married for 18, going on 19 years.
So, Joe, how were you treated when you returned to civilian life?
When I returned from Vietnam, in particular, I came through Travis Air Force Base, and one thing that left a bad taste is the treatment of the GIs returning most of them directly from Vietnam. Of course, I came by way of Subic, but I had been in combat as well. There were picketers, there were people who were rude to us, bad language used at the veterans, no respect for the veterans. Keep in mind, this was during the draft as well. Of course, I was a volunteer, but there were many people coming back who, it wasn't their choice, but they did their duty, and they went and did what they were expected to do in Vietnam, and then they were treated poorly when they came home. I am glad to see today that we show respect to our veterans and that we thank them for our service. The first time someone thanked me for my service was more than 25 years after this. And I was almost in tears when I said thank you for your service, because I've been waiting 25 years to hear that.
So when you left the service, you started working in the diving industry,
Yeah, for the diving school.
diving school. What have you done since separating from the military to today?
All right. Well, I actually, while I worked at the diving school, I knew that wouldn't be a full-time career for the rest of my life. The pay for instructors and teachers is very poor, but it was a place to work with the skills that I had to support my family while I went to college on a GI Bill. So I completed a bachelor's degree in 1985 at the closest university to where I worked, which was Cal State University, Dominguez Hills. And so I'd leave every night from my job, go straight there, and at night I was 4 nights a week at college, and I was a full-time student and a full-time employee. So it was pretty intense. But I graduated with the plan that I would get a business job, and I had a degree in business, and I did. I landed a job as a forms manager for Coldwell Banker, and that was the beginning of my career. And then I kind of went into marketing and advertising, and I did many marketing and advertising projects, mostly printed material, but also some video clips like advertisements for home video and so forth, trailers. And I worked for Paramount Pictures for a while. That was kind of the epitome of my career. I worked for a catalog company that did direct sales through the catalog after the Paramount. I worked for Mitsubishi Motors. And then later in life, I wanted to work with nonprofits because I was comfortable and I didn't feel it was necessary to always chase the dollar and always expect higher pay raises and better positions and so forth. I just want to work for nonprofits. So in the year 2000, I went to work for companies that were all nonprofit related and fundraising primarily. So for the last 15 years, from 2000 till 2015, when I retired, I worked for nonprofit organizations.
How did the military experiences affect your life?
I learned, as I had explained, about my relationship both on the Mispillion with early wine and in diving school when I was in charge, that you need to be accountable to other people and you need to care about other people. No one really cares about how much you have or where you are in your life. What they really care about is what do you do and how much do you care about other people. And so that was also part of my rationalization for working for nonprofits my last 15 years was I wanted to feel good inside about the work that I did that paid the bills. And I thought it was the best choice. And I look back at it when I wouldn't do it any other way except maybe start it earlier in my life. I think that one of the things, too, that we should think about doing, and it's like what I do here in Monrovia, is we should give back to the community. Now, you can do that as a volunteer. You can get active. I volunteer with this Veterans History Project. Like yourself, I do interviews as well. I know interview other people in time. I also am a benefits coach in the Monrovia Public Library. I also volunteer in the literacy program where I'm helping people to read so they can unlock their own futures and improve their own lives.
Great. How has your service impacted your feelings about war and the military?
Military is a job where you have to do the job. It doesn't matter that you could get killed or you could get maimed. The job has to be done. And that, of course, you learn about that starting in boot camp. I mean, everyone goes to their battle stations. You are at your battle stations because everybody else is depending on you to do your job. Everyone does their job. And you can talk to any combat veteran or even those who haven't seen combat, but they've been trained for combat. They know it's not about me. It's about my friends, the men and women who are with me. And I've got their back because they have my back. And I think that is something that a lot of civilians have never been in that position. They have no concept of what it means to sacrifice yourself for the benefit of the common good. But also, you know the job has to get done, and you will stay at that job no matter what. And in civilian life, that determination in my life has made me more successful than ever before, because I came out of the military going, I'm going to succeed. So I was going to succeed as a diving instructor, then as a student in college, and I had a high B average in college, and in every job that I had, I was going to excel. I was going to be the star. I was, always be, if not number one, somewhere in the top anyway of whatever I took on in life. The military is great, especially for people who have no careers and who really need to learn discipline, because that discipline has made me successful, and I know a lot of other veterans successful as well. And then my views of war is a terrible waste. It's a waste of human lives. Many people out there probably think it's the lives that are lost in combat. It is that, but it's more than that, because every person who serves in combat is giving a portion of their lives. You think about it, every month or year of deployment is a month or a year of your life that you're sacrificing for your country. And so that's like dying in little pieces. And that is the sacrifice that people should be thinking about when they say thank you for your service, because they're literally thanking you for a piece of your life that you gave up to make us free, to allow us to be Americans and enjoy the freedoms of our country. I see it as a waste of resources as well, but I will add, just if we enter war, we should never again enter a war like Vietnam where our plan is to have a draw. It's like, we're not going to go into your area, you're not going to go into ours, we're just going to finish this in a draw. That's like two boxers trying to come out and have a tie. There has to be a winner. And if you don't have a plan to be a winner, don't go to war. You better plan. And you need to have an exit strategy. When are you going to know you've met your objective, and when are you going to get out? I think like General Colin Powell said, that without an exit strategy, you would never go to war again. And I agree with that. You have to know where you're going to go. But you think about it, it's also all the supplies that are consumed, the fuel oil that's consumed, the resources that our country has lost when we go to war, when perhaps we shouldn't have. But on the other side of that, you have to look at the person who you are opposed to. If the individual is like Adolf Hitler, and he's going to keep doing what he has to come out on top and domineer and be the ruler of the world, you've got to draw a line and say, this is it. We have a plan. We're going to take you on. That's not going to happen.
What message would you like to leave for future generations?
Please pay respect to the veterans who have served you and served your country. And understand that even though you may not have the commitment to take on that type of service, respect them for the service that they've put in, and tell them so. I think that was the thing that touched me most, is when people started thanking me for my contribution to our freedoms.
Well, Joseph, thank you for your service, and thank you for answering our questions. Is there anything else you would like to share?
I don't know.
Do you have any closing thoughts regarding the Veterans History Program?
I think the Veterans History Project is an outstanding way for people to tell their stories. And I was surprised that I got to tell my story, and I'm privileged to be able to do that. I got to tell a little bit of some of the other people's stories as well, my father's and Master Chief Brashear's. But I think this is a way that people doing college projects and research and so forth can learn from people who are there about things that aren't always in the history books or aren't always in the movies that you see. You get little pieces of it from a whole different perspective. It's sort of like, D-Day, seeing it from several different viewpoints. And so it's true with the Vietnam War, for example, where my story is added to thousands of other stories out there. You see it from a lot of different points of view.
Well, Joseph Callahan, thank you very much.
Thank you.